Two coworkers sit down the same afternoon to build their dividend portfolios. One of them opens 14 browser tabs, spends the next 3 weekends comparing yields, expense ratios, and sector weightings across dozens of funds, and eventually builds a portfolio of 9 different ETFs, because he read that diversification means owning more things. The other one picks 3 funds, sets up automatic contributions split between them, and closes the laptop in under 20 minutes. A year later, when you actually look at the underlying holdings of both portfolios, they overlap by more than 70%. The guy with 9 funds spent 15 extra hours building something that behaves almost identically to the 20-minute version. This happens constantly in dividend investing, and it's the reason the 3-fund portfolio has quietly become one of the most respected strategies among people who actually understand what they're doing, not despite its simplicity, but because of it. Here's the actual portfolio, and then we'll get into why each piece is there and what it's doing for you. Fund 1 is a core dividend growth or dividend quality fund, something like SCHD or VIG. This is the foundation, usually 50 to 60% of the portfolio. SCHD screens for companies with strong balance sheets, consistent free cash flow, and a track record of raising dividends, then weights them accordingly. VIG takes a similar approach, but leans toward companies with at least 10 consecutive years of dividend increases. Either one gives you exposure to well-run, financially healthy companies without you having to evaluate a single balance sheet yourself. The expense ratio on both sits around 0.06%, meaning on a $50,000 position, you're paying roughly $30 a year for that entire screening and rebalancing process to happen automatically, forever. Fund 2 is a broader high dividend fund for diversification and slightly higher current yield. Something like VYMI. Where SCHD and VIG are somewhat selective, VYMI casts a wider net, holding around 500 companies with above average dividend yields across a broad range of sectors. This is usually 25 to 35% of the portfolio. The reason you want this alongside a more selective fund like SCHD is that quality screen funds can end up concentrated in certain sectors during certain periods, and VYMI's breadth smooths that out. You're essentially pairing a fund that picks its spots carefully with a fund that spreads much wider, so a downturn in any single sector doesn't hit your whole income stream at once. Fund 3 is international dividend exposure, something like VX's dividend-focused counterpart, or a fund like VYMI, which targets high dividend-paying companies outside the US. This is usually the smallest slice, 10 to 20%. Here's why it matters even though it's the least exciting piece. The US stock market has had an extraordinary run over the last 15 years, and it's easy to forget that isn't guaranteed to continue indefinitely. From 2000 to 2009, US stocks were roughly flat for the entire decade, while international markets, particularly emerging markets, significantly outperformed. Nobody knows which region wins the next 15 years, and international dividend-focused companies, especially in Europe, tend to have higher average payout ratios than US companies as a matter of corporate culture. Skipping this slice entirely means betting your entire income stream on one country's economy and one country's corporate tax and dividend policy never changing in a way that hurts you. Now here's the part people get wrong constantly, and it's worth spending real time on. Overlap if you build a diversified 9-fund portfolio by picking SCHD, VYMI, GROW, HDV, VIG, SPIDE, Noble, DVY, and STI. You might feel like you've built something sophisticated. In reality, the top holdings of most of these funds are the same 30 to 40 mega cap companies, just weighted slightly differently. You've added complexity, additional expense ratios stacking up, more tax lots to track, more rebalancing decisions to make, and in exchange, you've gotten almost nothing in actual diversification benefit. A tool that's freely available, a portfolio overlap checker, will show you this in about 10 seconds if you plug in any combination of popular dividend ETFs. Most people who build large multi-fund dividend portfolios have never actually checked this and would be uncomfortable with what they'd find. 3 funds, chosen deliberately for what each one specifically does that the others don't. Beats 9 funds chosen because each one individually looked appealing in isolation. This is the same principle behind why a well-built recipe with 5 ingredients that complement each other beats a dish where you dumped in 15 ingredients because you liked each one on its own. Let's talk about actual allocation with real numbers, because the percentages matter more than the fund names. A common split looks like 55% SCHD, 30% VIM, 15% VYMI. On a $30,000 starting portfolio, that's $16,500 into SCHD, $9,000 into VIM, and $4,500 into VYMI. The blended yield on a portfolio like this typically lands somewhere between 3.2% and 3.8%, depending on where each fund's yield sits in a given year. That's not the highest yield you could chase. But it's a yield built on companies that have historically kept paying and raising those dividends through recessions, not a yield built on funds that might be quietly returning your own capital back to you. Here's something that trips people up when they first set this up. You don't need to buy all 3 funds in every single contribution. If you're investing $400 a month, you don't need to split that into $220, $120, and $60 every single time and deal with the fractional share math. Most brokerages let you set target percentages and will nudge your allocation back toward those targets over time as you add money, buying more of whichever fund has drifted below its target percentage. This is simpler than it sounds and takes about 5 minutes to set up once. Rebalancing is the other piece people either obsess over or completely ignore, and both extremes are mistakes. You don't need to rebalance monthly, and constantly buying and selling to hit exact percentages just generates unnecessary transactions, and in a taxable account, potentially unnecessary tax events. Checking your allocation twice a year and nudging it back toward your targets if something has drifted more than 5 percentage points is enough. If SCHD has had a strong run and now makes up 65% of your portfolio instead of the target 55%, you simply direct new contributions toward VIM and VYMI until the balance corrects itself, rather than selling anything. Where should this portfolio actually live? If you have access to a Roth IRA and haven't maxed it, that's the best home for dividend funds specifically, because every dollar of dividend income and growth inside that account is never taxed again, not when it's paid out, not when you eventually withdraw it in retirement. A taxable brokerage account works fine too. And dividends from these funds are generally taxed at qualified dividend rates, which are lower than ordinary income tax rates for most people, but you'll want to actually track that at tax time rather than assuming. The honest downside of this entire approach is that it will never be the most exciting portfolio in any given year. Some year, an individual high-yield fund or a hand-picked collection of stocks will outperform this 3-fund setup, and someone in the comments will point that out like it's a discovery. It probably will in some specific 12-month window. The 3-fund dividend portfolio isn't built to win any single year. It's built to still be standing, still paying you, and still growing that payment. In year 25, without you having needed to make a single clever decision in between. The guy with 9 overlapping funds and the guy with 3 deliberately chosen ones are likely to end up in a similar place financially. Only one of them got their weekends back.